Late last year, a new artificial intelligence app called ChatGPT launched to the public. Who cares, you say? Well, perhaps almost anyone who reads or writes anything on the internet should. What it can do is remarkable and can be almost impossible to distinguish from what a real person might write or create. Is it a watershed moment for humanity or just another nifty technological advance? Let's ask. In Berkeley, California, Alison Gopnik, professor of psychology and philosophy at the University of California at Berkeley. In Vancouver, British Columbia, Gary Marcus, emeritus professor of psychology and neural science at NYU, New York University, and co-author of Rebooting AI. He's also a founder and CEO of Geometric Intelligence, a machine learning company acquired by Uber in 2016. And here in our studio, Gillian Hadfield, professor of law at the University of Toronto and AI chair at CIFAR, the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. She's also a senior policy advisor for the company that created ChatGPT. That's OpenAI. Gillian, delighted to have you here in our studio. Alison and Gary on the line in Points Beyond. Great to have you as well. Normally, I would start by asking one of our guests to sort of explain what this ChatGPT is. But why don't we outsource that and get ChatGPT to do that for us, shall we? We plugged in the info, and here is what it said about itself. In the field of artificial intelligence, a new technology has emerged that promises to change the way we interact with computers. ChatGPT, developed by OpenAI, is a language model that has been trained on an unprecedented amount of conversational text. The result is a system that can understand and respond to prompts in a way that is eerily similar to a human. The potential applications of ChatGPT are varied and far-reaching, but with great power comes great responsibility. As this technology develops, it's crucial that we consider the potential ethical implications and ensure that it is used for the betterment of society. No offense, I'm not sure any of you could have said that any better, but here we go. Alison, start us off. How should we understand this moment in the evolution of artificial intelligence?
Well, I think a good way to think about it is as a new cultural technology. In other words, instead of thinking about it as if it was an individual agent, throughout the history of humankind, we've found new ways to take advantage of all the things that the people behind us have done. And if you think about things like writing, or print, or libraries, or internet search itself, those are technologies that let us take advantage of all the other things that other people can do. And I think that GPT, these large language models, are kind of the latest and greatest stage in that development. So what they let us do is take all the words, all the text that people have written over all time, really, it's certainly all the internet, and it lets us summarize those in a way that is effective and lets us interact. I think what it isn't is a new kind of intelligence.
Gary, what's your view on that?
Oh, I certainly agree with what Alison said. I would say that they're cultural tools, but they're cultural tools that need a warning label. The text that it crafted says that GPT-3 understands things, and then it's eerily similar to people. It is eerily similar to people, but it doesn't really understand what it's talking about, and so it can make a lot of mistakes. For example, if you ask it to write your biography, it will probably make stuff up. If you ask it to do the right kind of math word problems, it will make mistakes on those math word problems. There are lots of things that it does that look as if they're correct, but they're not. Or you get it to describe some scientific theory that's false. It may make up references for that fake theory. And so there's problems around misinformation and accuracy. It is a very powerful tool, but you really need to know how to use it. And I think right now the general public thinks it can do a lot of things that it can't, including comprehension, including understanding at a human level. It doesn't really do that. It just gives the illusion of doing that.
So it's the George Santos of artificial intelligence is what you're saying?
It is a lot. Yeah, it is a lot like George Santos.
Got it. Understood. Okay. You like that one,
I
Gillian?
did. I said yes.
Okay.
Yes,
what would you add to what our two other guests have said so far?
Well, you know, your question, what is this moment in human history? And I think it is a pretty distinctive moment. There's, I think we will look back and say, you know, the release of ChatGPT was the sign of another significant step forward in where we are in the development of artificial intelligence. Some people have been comparing it to like when they first started interacting with the internet or with Google search, which is now decades behind us. I think these things are going very rapidly, and I think that's the piece that I would say. I've been working with OpenAI since 2018. I've been playing with GPT, the underlying technology, for a number of years. But ChatGPT is something beyond that, and I was really stunned by the leap that it makes, just in that conversational sense, that you can have it write that, but then you could say, well, say this, or correct the errors that Gary is talking about, or can you give me a source for that, which it won't be very good at doing, by the way, but you interact with it. And it's that interaction that I think is a big leap for this technology.
Allison, can ChatGPT actually think and reason?
Well, I think it's kind of the wrong question. Here's another question. Can the UC Berkeley Library think and reason and have knowledge? Well, you'd say that doesn't make any sense. Does Google, when you ask Google to find something, does it know that you're trying? Does it really search and find the thing? It's not really that kind of a system. It's not a system that's designed to reason, to think, to understand, because reasoning and thinking and understanding is about how we interact with the world that's outside. It's how we interact with the external world, how we find out new things about it. And the GPT, the large language models, are really ways of summarizing the things that we already know through language. And again, I think I want to emphasize, as Gillian did, that doesn't mean that it's trivial or it's not going to make a giant difference to how people function or how the world functions. If you think about writing and print, they completely changed the way that both societies and knowledge worked. Developing writing and print were really fairly massive changes. So it's not to say that it isn't an individual agent that is intelligent, that goes out in the world and understands it and reasons and thinks and draws inferences. Instead, it's this way of summarizing all the text that other people have produced, in a sense, imitating the patterns that are in that language. That's not to say that it's trivial or it won't change things in important ways.
Gillian, though, if we go back, let's use the analogy of the internet, or perhaps more particularly social media. At the dawn of social media, there were a lot of people who thought, wow, isn't this fabulous? It's going to democratize and give everybody a voice. And 10, 15 years later, it's a toxic lake of crap, most of it right now. Do you think, and I guess I ask you this as someone who was very much involved with OpenAI, the company that created this, are we being open enough to the downsides of this development?
I think we are. I think Gary's right to emphasize the downsides, the risks. But it's what we economists call a general purpose technology, which means it can be used for all kinds of things. So teachers can use it to come up with problem sets for their students. I read about a teacher who had used it to help grade and review student essays or help students write essays. We can use it to summarize information. I actually think the thing that I've started using it for is as a substitute for Google search, because I can ask it about something I don't understand, and then it can give me an answer, and I can say, well, that doesn't quite make sense, or could you explain that a little bit more? So it's going to be used in all kinds of domains. I think probably it's like electricity, all across the board. And so there will be bad uses of it. I think it could superpower some of the negative stuff we see on social media, for example. So I think we are alert. I think we're paying attention to that, and I think we should be paying attention to that. But we don't want to drown the risks. Don't want to let the risks drown out, all the advances that I think we can anticipate from this technology.
Our producer on this segment, Eric Bombacino, wanted to have a little fun with GPT, and so he asked it to tell us about the potential dangers, but in the style of the King James Bible. And here's what ChatGPT had to say. Sheldon, you want to bring this graphic up? And lo, the ChatGPT spake. I can generate text in the manner of man, yet I lack the knowledge and wisdom of the true and the good. And thus the words that I speak may lead to misinformation. For I am but a tool, a reflection of the knowledge and information that I have been taught. For as the ChatGPT is trained on vast amounts of data from the internet, and behold, not all that is written on the internet is true or accurate, and so the ChatGPT may perpetuate misinformation if it is present in the data upon which it was trained. Gary, I gotta say, that's pretty cool. A simple Google search will often produce links to misinformation. How is AI tech like ChatGPT different from that?
Well, one thing, just seeing the quote that you made, is Chat wants to throw the humans under the bus. But the reality is that chat doesn't always behave in ways that are consistent with the data that's there. So, for example, if you ask it for the average height of the female presidents of the United States, it will just invent female presidents of the United States that don't exist. I've seen systems like this, for example, say that Elon Musk died in a car accident in 2018. And what's interesting about that is that there's a lot of data that are out there that show you that Elon Musk is still alive. So yes, some of the misinformation it creates, for example, about COVID vaccines, is from human beings that have said things that are untrue, and it will simply blindly repeat them. But it also doesn't know how different pieces of things go together. And so sometimes it fabricates things that no human has ever seen before. There's, in fact, lots of examples on my Twitter feed of it doing that. So it actually creates a new misinformation problem beyond the one that's already there. And then it creates a third one, which is that it's so good at creating misinformation that, for example, a Russian troll farm might want to buy itself a copy of GPT-3, which is not, or a knockoff of GPT-3, which is not that expensive, and then use it to accelerate the production of misinformation. So it spreads existing misinformation, it fabricates new stuff, and accelerates the pace. So that's three things to be pretty worried about there. Jillian is right that there are positives too, but I don't think we can take for granted that the positives are going to outweigh the negatives. There's some pretty serious negatives there.
Well, in fact, you've gone further in writing. You've said that systems like these pose a real and imminent threat to the fabric of society. You really want to go that far?
I really do want to go that far. The reason is there's the Russian fire hose model of misinformation, which is you just spread so much misinformation that nobody trusts anything anymore. It's not that you want to get across one specific thing, but you just want to create an atmosphere of distrust. And I think that this tool, like the flood the zone with, I guess I can't say the word on the air, that Steve Bannon talked about, this is a tool that can create an atmosphere of radical mistrust. And historically, I think it's authoritarians that have preyed on that atmosphere, and I'm worried about that.
Allison, how worried are you that this new technology is going to push us further into a so-called post-truth era?
Well, there's an interesting historical analogy. So if you think about when cheap forms of print first appeared in the 18th century, two things happened. One thing that happened was that you could quickly spread messages like democracy and the Enlightenment, and it's no coincidence that Benjamin Franklin was a printer. But another thing that happened that we don't think about very often was that there was exactly the kind of flood of obscenity and libel and misinformation that Gary is talking about. And it was a contributing factor in the French Revolution, for example. So we've sort of seen this before. And the interesting thing is that what seems to have happened is that we developed new kinds of regulation, new norms, new laws, new institutions like editors and newspapers that actually meant that this amazing, there's a wonderful book by Richard Darton called The Literary Underground of the Ancien Regime, where he just described this incredible flood of the word that Gary was about to use. I mean, for example, Let Them Eat Cake, Marie Antoinette's Let Them Eat Cake, that was a meme, a misinformation meme from the 18th century. So it's not like this kind of thing hasn't happened before. And we have a hint from that the way to solve it is to have norms and regulations and ways of and institutions that are designed to make sure that we don't have that kind of flood. I'm not convinced that this is the capacity for humans to get misinformation from the culture is something that is now qualitatively different from what we've done before, but the way that we've dealt with it before is the way that we need to deal with it now. Jillian used the example of electricity, and that's another interesting metaphor, right? So if you sort of imagine it's 1900 and someone says, here's a good idea, every house is gonna have this extremely strong electrical spark in it, which we know sets things on fire, but we're just going to put it in everybody's house and assume that everything will work out fine in the end. Well, it only works out fine when you have, a book of code that's this thick about what you have to do to keep electricity in check. And I think that's an analogy to what will happen with these kinds of systems.
Well, let me put that follow-up analogy to Jillian. Are you convinced that we can create a code that thick to make sure that this doesn't take us further down the road of a post-truth era?
Well, I think that we're going to have to be a lot more innovative than we have been historically. That is exactly how we've dealt with it before, with text and with codes. And I think these new technologies are demanding that we be as innovative about how we regulate as these technologies are themselves. But I do want to underline the point that Allison's making, which is to say, there have been moments in history where we have significant technologies, and if we even just want to focus on communication and thinking or exchange technologies, and each one of them has put the burden on us to figure out how to regulate, how to make it safe, how to make it beneficial, to lower the risks and increase the benefits. I think it's exactly where we are today. The work that I do is very focused on how are we going to catch up to these technologies, because I don't think that our existing institutions, I don't think it will work for us to write the code like the electrical code, but we need to be thinking about what kinds of methods will work to try and make sure that this technology is producing benefits and not imposing harms.
Gary, how hopeful are you that we can, again, to use the same analogy, create a code book this thick to make sure that things like ChatGPT are reliable and trustworthy?
I think that we need to do a couple things. I think that we need to make people criminally liable for misinformation if distributed in enough volume. So it's one thing if somebody says one thing that's not true on Twitter, but if people mass produce it, I think we have to hold them criminally liable. And I think we're probably going to need to invent new technologies. The current AI is not very good at detecting misinformation. It's much better at generating it, and that's going to lead to a scale problem that we haven't really encountered before, where there's just much more of it around. And so we might need new kinds of AI that are actually able to process things like, is this valid relative to some ground truth that we can agree on?
Let's hear from ChatGPT again when we consider one of the truly terrifying things that I know every university or college professor is considering at this stage of the game. Here we go. It is possible that ChatGPT could be used to generate text that could be plagiarized in universities. Since ChatGPT is able to generate text that is similar to human writing, it could be used to write essays, research papers, or other written assignments without proper citation. Now, that's the technology itself acknowledging that the potential here for mischief is huge. How concerned are you, Gillian, that your students might in the future hand in assignments that have been written by an artificial intelligence?
Well, I think it's something for every faculty member to be thinking about, for universities to be thinking about. But that's because I think this technology is going to disrupt the way we conduct our universities and the way we do evaluation and teaching. There are responses to it. We're all going to have to learn, I think, as we see more and more of this type of technology out there, to be clear about representing what is and isn't something that we've produced. If somebody's trying to say, I'd like to see what you're able to do on your own, we're going to have norms around being honest about that. Mm-hmm. That's part of the rules and norms that Allison was referring to. Lying has been a part of human society since there were human societies, and we've had to find ways to control that. I think there are technologies that are being developed to try and track, to be able to determine, did this piece of text, was it significantly affected by using ChatGPT or similar language models? There can be ways to watermark that and identify that. So we could be doing that in universities. But mostly I'd like us to be teaching students how to use it and how to respond with it. And I can always bring somebody into my office and ask them questions or give them oral exams or have them do group assignments or write their answers in longhand. I think we have a lot of techniques available, but it's going to disrupt education, I think.
Well, Allison, let me put a for instance to you, and you tell me whether or not this is acceptable. What if you had a student approach you and say, yes, I fess up, I used ChatGPT to get a first draft, but then I went in afterwards and I kind of put it in more of my voice, and I corrected some of the errors that it made. So it's really, at the end of the day, my paper. Would that be acceptable to you?
Well, I think it's interesting. One of the things that technology has always done is change what we value. So when you start getting mass-produced objects, you start having a real value for things that are innovative or handmade or different. And I think a good thing that could happen is that the effect of this is going to be that instead of having our value be, did you summarize the stuff that you read, which is something that GPT is, it's did you have a thought that was original and not something that you could have just gotten from reading. And I think lots of us have had the experience of interacting with ChatGPT and feeling like, oh yeah, I've heard that before. That's like that student who hasn't really thought about the material and is just spitballing the answer to the exam. That's exactly what ChatGPT sounds like. And we shouldn't really be encouraging our students to to do that. What we should be doing is encouraging methods of evaluation that are going to emphasize what is going to become increasingly valuable in human, which is this ability for innovation. I heard a wonderful comment from an artist talking about the DALL-E, which is sort of like the visual equivalent of GPT. And she said, oh, this is fantastic, because what I can do is I can see what it will generate, and I'll know that that's the cliche. That's the thing that everybody will do. That's the boring thing to do. And whatever it is that I do, it should not be like that. And I'm hoping that we can get a similar norm in the context of the university. If the essay looks like GPT could produce it, then it's not what you want. You want something that goes beyond that. I said to my students, look, if you want an A+ in the course, you have to do something that isn't something that's in any of the rubrics and that I can't tell you about beforehand. And they always act as if that's terribly mean and unfair, but maybe saying you have to do something that GPT can't do would be a good bar.
Well, Gary, let me put the same example to you and ask the question this way. What, if anything, do you think would be lost if that first draft were written by GPT, regardless of what editing or fixing or improving a student does after that?
Well, I've retired from the academy early, but what I would do if I were teaching right now is I'd say, fine, let chat write your first draft, but I want the real essay that you write to be a comparison between what ChatGPT has said and what you think is actually interesting. Where has it gone wrong? Where is it cliched? I want the essay to be about the difference between it and what the hypothetical A+ paper would be. I think that we can't bury it. It's out of Pandora's box now, but I think the more that people can reason about it critically and use this as a lesson in critical thinking, the better. The more that we can have people learn about its limitations, learn a little bit about what's special about people, the better. Let's use it as a teachable moment.
Jillian.
So I think one of the things that's really interesting about this is to think about what is the world that those students are heading into after they graduate in a world that has ChatGPT. And in fact, the type of work that we're going to want from humans is going to be different, because if ChatGPT can summarize something, can produce that B+ answer or a basic summary of existing information, what we want our students to have is that value that they will bring to the work that they do when they graduate, which is precisely as Gary is laying out there. You know, where is it wrong? Where is it bad? Where's the idea that ChatGPT can't come up with? That's going to be where we want our students to. We actually shouldn't be training them to just spit out, oh, this is what you've read, rewrite it, and put it in a few different words. We actually want them to develop that critical thinking. That's why I think it actually disrupts our education. It puts the pressure on us in the universities and schools to actually make good on our promise that we're teaching critical thinking and those higher reasoning skills that we know ChatGPT is not doing.
Let me do a quick follow-up with you on that, because I can't tell whether I'm concerned about this because I'm jealous we didn't have this ability back in the day when I went to university, or whether it just feels like it's cheating. It feels like it's cheating if you've got some other kind of artificial intelligence writing even just a first draft for you. Am I being sticklish about this?
It's cheating if what the teacher is trying to do is to evaluate, can you produce an outline from scratch? If that's the skill we think we're teaching and we're trying to evaluate, then yes, that's teaching. But if that's cheating, yes. Mm-hmm. But if what we're trying to do is develop the capacity of critical thinking and innovative reasoning, then it's no longer cheating. It just wasn't working very well. But all we could do is say, give me an outline. But now we have the capacity to do something even further. We can say, here's an outline. How do you go beyond that? Many of my students can't get to that point because it takes them a semester to figure out how to do the outline. So it's cheating depending on what it is you're trying to evaluate. Maybe we've got to change what we're trying to evaluate.
Gotcha. All right, Gary, we're going to do something that comes out of your bailiwick here, because ChatGPT, I guess some are concerned that it's going to start to do the work of knowledge workers. And Gary, you wrote about this. This is from Henry Minsky, who asked ChatGPT to describe losing your sock in the dryer in the style of the Declaration of Independence from the United States. And here's what GPT came up with. When in the course of household events, it becomes necessary for one to dissolve the bonds that have connected a sock to its mate, and to assume among the powers of the laundry room the separate and equal station to which the laws of physics and of household maintenance entitle it, a decent respect to the opinions of socks requires that it should declare the causes which impel it to go missing. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all socks are created equal and are endowed by their manufacturer with certain unalienable rights. Now, folks, that's pretty good, I gotta say. That's not bad at all. Are we at the point, Gary, where AI can write articles, can create content, can create television or movie scripts on a par with human writers?
Well, it can do this, but it doesn't know what it's talking about. And so it can also do complete, utter BS, if I can say that on the air. Here's another thing that Henry Minsky himself sent me yesterday, also written with ChatGPT. I won't have time for the whole thing, but he says, write a scientific paper for Nature, which hypothetically explains what would happen if immune cells had financial needs and how payments would affect their efficiency. And it goes on to write a full paper about that, investigating the potential impact of financial needs on the efficiency of immune cells, which is just nonsense. And so if we don't have humans in the loop, then it's a pretty dangerous tool, in fact. It captures the style. It's a mimic. It pastiches together things that have been written. So it puts together stuff that's been said about finance with stuff that's been said about cells, but it can't actually reason about the relationship between finance and cells. So you don't want this thing to actually do science. If you wanted to do fiction, it tends to produce cliches. And if you want to do nonfiction, you just can't trust it. So I think it is a tool that we can leverage in some ways, but we have to really still keep our hands on the steering wheel here.
Allison, do you see a possibility somewhere down the road that AI could create something original and innovative?
Well, I think it's unlikely that it could do it just based on text, just based on these very, very large language models. Now, if you think about how intelligence developed in the natural world, it develops when organisms are interacting with the real world, or doing things, or exploring, or trying to find things out in the world. I study young children, and that's what you see young children doing. And I think it's more likely that if you're going to see something that's like real intelligence, it's going to come from that kind of those kinds of systems that actually have to go out and interact with the world and learn things. Which again is not to say that these cultural technologies aren't going to make a big difference. It's interesting, if you look at cultural evolution, there's always this tension between imitation, being able to take all that information that all the people before us have developed and use it, and innovation, taking that information and finding out something new, figuring out a new way to use it, figuring out something new to do with it. And culture is about progress. It's about those two forces. And as Gary's saying, the large language models are really about imitation rather than innovations. But I think there's also an interesting thing to just remember, which is that it's always true that the technologies that we're dealing with as adults seem disruptive in a way that they don't if you think about what happened before you came on the scene. So I think an interesting example with writing is I am old enough to remember when you wrote with longhand on a legal pad, or maybe you typed on a typewriter. And the innovation of word processing totally changed the way that people wrote. It was a completely different process to write when you could cut and paste in a machine, as opposed to literally having to have someone cut and paste in the past. And there was a whole genre of knowledge workers who we seem to have completely forgotten about, namely secretaries and typists, who just did nothing but do that work and who don't exist anymore. So that's another example where what we do really changes as a result of the technology. It really is disruptive. It really does lead to changes in the workforce. But I think in general, your sense is that once people mastered word processors, that turned out to be a much better way of writing than writing in longhand and getting your secretary to type it up.
All right, let me follow up with Gillian on that. You're a professor of law. Could ChatGPT do the work, some of the work, that lawyers now do?
Yes. I think we're observing that. There are certainly companies and organizations that are developing that, and I've experimented myself asking legal questions of these systems, and they do not a bad job. And one of the things that I've spent a lot of time thinking about is a real crisis of access to justice, which is very few ordinary people can get decent legal advice. What does this lease mean? can my employer do the following thing? I've received this thing called a subpoena. I can't even pronounce it in the mail. What does it mean? And currently, very few people have a lot of access to help on that. So I think properly trained and then properly regulated, a system like this, tuned properly, can give helpful legal advice to people. I think that would be a good thing. I think the key thing there is to recognize that we currently we don't allow just anybody right now to give anyone legal advice. We have a way of controlling that it's good advice. That way is saying you have to have gone to law school and become a member of the Bar Association or the Law Society. I'm actually a bit of a critic of using that method of ensuring that we get good advice. It sometimes doesn't work very well, and it's very expensive. We need to find, this going back to our regulation conversation, we need to find ways to make sure that whoever produces that application of this model is producing pretty decent advice and help. And I think we absolutely can develop those methods. I think that's a tremendously promising direction for the use of these models.
All right, Gary, in our last minute, you talked about criminal sanctions earlier for those who are truly mischievous as it relates to this. Any other regs you'd like to see in place that would help make the future just a little less scary on this issue?
I think that we need to take a longer view here and not simply accept that all new technologies are good technologies. That I think we probably need to have more money spent towards building regulators, training regulators to understand the strengths and weaknesses of these technologies. I think people treat them as magic. And for example, I think legal advice and medical advice are a weak spot in these systems. That when they're mission critical and when there could be serious harm, that's a problem. And the biggest problem there is the further they stray from their training set, the more dangerous. We need a more sophisticated discussion about how these things actually work in order to make the right regulations.
To be continued. And can I just say for the record, I really appreciated talking to actual, real, intelligent people as opposed to artificial intelligent people. That was great. Alison Gopnik in Berkeley, California, Gary Marcus in Vancouver, British Columbia, Gillian Hatfield here in our studio. Thanks so much for being on TVO tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Enjoy us humans while we last.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.